evening. See if we can do something better than that. That's kind of crazy. There. All right, I need to decrease that, and there we go. Good evening. Is anyone there? Let's see. 8 people. 6 likes already. Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? It looks like it's fine, but if you are there and you can hear me and can confirm that, I would be grateful. Nope, I can hear myself in the other room. We're good. So, welcome to the Collective Wisdom Project March Q&A. Thank you for being here. I'm going to go double check questions. I don't think I got any, but let's make sure. No questions there. And no questions there. All right. So, if you want to ask something, please do so in the comments, as always. In the absence of questions, I am going to continue to look at chapter, I think it's 86 of Father Seraphim Rose's biography. Let me get that link. Orthodoxy of the Heart, from Father Seraphim Rose's Life and Works by Hieromonk Damascene. We went through the first quarter or third maybe of the chapter last time, and I think it's got so much in it of value that it makes sense to continue. So I'll just read through it and riff on it. I will give you the link. I'll post it in the chat if you want to follow along. So in the first section, maybe I'll reread first, this is the first paragraph, and then I'll go down a little bit further. In this commandment have we from him, that he who loveth God love his brother also. 1 John 4:21. As Father Seraphim developed into a man of the heart, the thrust of his mission developed accordingly. When he had begun his missionary work, he had placed emphasis on upholding true orthodoxy, on taking a stand against modernism, renovationism, ecumenism. This may have been fine at a beginning stage. As he himself said, the more one finds out about Christian doctrine and practice, the more one discovers how many quote-unquote mistakes one has been making up to now, and one's natural desire is to be quote-unquote correct. But all this is only on the external level, as Father Seraphim came to see more clearly as the years went by. He never changed his basic original philosophy. He was no closer to becoming an ecumenist, modernist, or a new calendarist at the end of his life than he had been when he had first started printing the Orthodox word. It was just that now, especially after witnessing the bitter fruits of, quote, correctness disease, unquote, in the church, he saw that there was something much more essential that he should be preaching in these last times when, quote, the love of many grows cold, unquote. Above all, Father Seraphim became a preacher of orthodoxy of the heart. Besides the resurrection of Holy Russia, of which more will be said later, this was his main theme during the last part of his life. So I'm going to skip ahead to just beyond where we were left off last month. So this the last section was about some Protestants that were becoming Orthodox and his kind of approach to those groups, in which he saw a lot of good and was desired to talk about, that there are positives and things that we should be grateful for in these groups, especially as kind of a precursor to the people from those groups becoming Orthodox. So let me skip back to the chat in case anyone has. Nope. Okay. Father Seraphim, this is going back to the biography, about a third of the way down. Father Seraphim spoke along similar lines about those who were converting to Orthodoxy in Africa. Since the 1960s, he had followed the Orthodox mission in Africa with great interest, writing and publishing articles about African converts to Orthodoxy, corresponding with them and sending them clothes, supplies, Bibles, and the Orthodox Word. That was the Orthodox Word was the Orthodox journal that he and Father Herman started together. He was deeply moved by the letters he received from Africa, seeing in them a simple piety and a warm love for Jesus Christ and the Church that he felt could be instructive to our to overcomplicated people of the West. In one talk, he said, quote, "During the last 50 years, there's been a tremendous movement of conversion of people to Orthodoxy in Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, and now the Congo and other countries. They often write to us at the Orthodox Word, the simplest kind of letters, very evangelical, about rejoicing in the Lord. They are very, very pious and faithful to Orthodoxy. It is just such simple-hearted people that Christ wants. And it is such people who are coming into the Orthodox Church now." End quote. In another talk, Father Seraphim spoke more about some of the letters he received. Quote, "They are very touching letters from African boys who are converted to Orthodoxy. They have the utmost respect for their bishop. They go to seminary. It is obvious that a very Orthodox feeling is being given to these people in Africa. If simple people are preached the Orthodox gospel, they respond now in the same way that they have always responded in the past. The problem is, rather, with complicated people." End quote. We are the complicated people that he's talking about. So I think that's really helpful. I'll go on in a second here, but in talking about Orthodoxy to people, I often say that it really is simple, and a lot of times people complicate things. The Church, obviously, prior to Gutenberg and modern media, the Church had a way of catechism, and that was fine, and in many ways more effective than what we have today with modern media. And I think that's really important to remember. It's easy to lose sight of the effect that this media has had on society, and therefore on the Church, at least those who come to the Church and then those that have become Orthodox. It's important to remember that these tools can get in the way And what Father Seraphim is referring to here is that these simple African converts have a receive Orthodoxy in a way that is much more immediate, rather than being mediated through our minds. And one of Father Seraphim's big points throughout his life was, he has a famous quote about crucifying his mind, and how important that was in his ability to go deeper into Orthodoxy. So this is why I really do think it's a really important point that often gets forgotten, especially maybe among new converts who often come to Orthodoxy through the internet, through reading. And obviously these are the tools that we have, and that they're useful up to a certain point, but it's important to understand that Orthodoxy is much deeper than that, and we need to get past the books and enter more deeply into the liturgical and spiritual life of the church if we're going to actually understand what Orthodoxy is. Let's see. So we will go for being here again for those of you who've come in, and we're continuing here with chapter 86 of the biography of Father Seraphim Rose, his life and works. In preaching inward orthodoxy of the heart, Father Seraphim warned against being calculating and critical. He identified this as the temptation of following, quote unquote, external wisdom. Sometimes, he said, one's zeal for orthodoxy, in quotes, quote unquote, orthodoxy, can be so excessive that it produces a situation similar to that which caused an old Russian woman to remark about an enthusiastic American convert, "Well, he's certainly Orthodox, all right, but is he a Christian?" To be, quote, Orthodox but not Christian, end quote, is a state that has a particular name in Christian language. It means to be a Pharisee, to be so bogged down in the letter of the church's laws that one loses the spirit that gives them life, the spirit of true Christianity. Father Seraphim pointed out how we can get carried away with, quote unquote, correctness, even in small ways. Quote, "We can like well-done Byzantine icons, which is a good thing, but we go too far if we are disdainful of the more modern style icons, which are still in many of our churches. The same goes for church singing, architecture, the following of correct rules of fasting, of kneeling in church, etc. If you get all excited about having the right kind of icons and begin saying, quote, there's an icon of the wrong style in our church, unquote, you have to be very careful because you're placing all your emphasis on something external. In fact, if there is a church with nothing but good style icons, I'm suspicious of it, because maybe the people there are just following the fashion. There is a case, one of many, in which a church had old original Russian icons, some good and some in rather poor taste, painted in a relatively new style. And a zealous person took them all out and put in new paper icon prints in perfect Byzantine style. And what was the result? The people there lost contact with tradition, with the people who gave them orthodoxy. They removed the original icons which believers had prayed before for centuries. Father Herman, this is if you aren't familiar with the life of Father Seraphim Rose, Father Herman was his co-struggler, and they started out as hermits living in Platina on the side of the mountain on their own. Gleb, and he became Father Herman, as well as along with Father Seraphim. Father Herman recalls how when he and Father Seraphim were first honoring the memory of Father Yurasam in the Orthodox Word in the early 1970s, he had expressed his reservations to his co-laborer. Quote, "How can we present Father Yurasam as a modern giant of traditional Orthodoxy?" End quote, Father Seraphim asked, when he had those 19th century Western-style icons in his church. "Those very icons," Father Seraphim replied, "prove that he was in the tradition because he accepted simply and lovingly what was handed down to him from his righteous fathers in the faith." So this Father Yurasam, I don't remember the story. He was, I can't remember how he ended up on Spruce Island, but it's been a while since I read the rest of the biography. But I believe that this was this ascetic that was came to Spruce Island and kept the memory of Saint Herman alive. And I think this point is worth making again, or emphasizing, highlighting. So Father Herman wanted, that both he and Father Seraphim revered Father Yurasam, who had been a very faithful ascetic up in Alaska, and they wanted to honor his memory and to present him in a positive light. But Father Herman's point was, well, he had these terrible 19th century style icons, which are not very traditional. And how can we present him as a representative of Orthodox piety? And Father Seraphim's point was that because he accepted what had been passed down to him, even though it wasn't perfect, someone that was maybe more obsessed with super correct orthodoxy might have looked at those icons and questioned the piety of Father Yurasam, for example. But Father Seraphim's point is, no, it's because he humbly received them, even though maybe he knew better, but he didn't put his own thoughts above what was passed down to him, and he was grateful for what he had. And that's a this willingness to be humble in the face of what we've been given, and grateful, doesn't mean that if we're painting new icons that we shouldn't try to paint more traditional icons. But these things are all gifts that have been given to the church by the Holy Spirit, and they can be used for good. They can also get in the way if we allow them to. If we're so obsessed about being correct, quote unquote, and we lose track of the orthodoxy of the heart, which comes through humility and through being grateful to what we've been given, and not being harsh and ungrateful. So this is this is something that obviously Father Seraphim was concerned about by the time he passed away, and was more concerned about people learning this humility, this humble gratefulness, than finding some super correct version of orthodoxy. And I think that's a great temptation. I think probably every new Orthodox person should read this chapter. Let's see. Father Seraphim also observed how we can be following quote unquote external wisdom when we get caught up in exalted ideas. Quote, "It is the fashion now to learn about the Jesus prayer, to read the Philokalia, to go, quote, back to the fathers," end quote. These kinds of things also will not save us. They are external. They may be helpful if they are used rightly, but if they become your passion, the first thing you are after, then they become externals which lead not to Christ, but to Antichrist. So again, going back to the point that I just made, these are all gifts, the canons of the church, all these things. But it requires discernment to know what role they need to play. And this is why it's so important to have a spiritual father, and to come in with a humility before the tradition of the church, but also before our local parish, our local priest, our bishop. There's no way that one can learn the tradition just from books and try to apply it in a way that is orthodox. This is something that comes through experientially, and we need the tradition. Literally means that which is passed down from generation to generation, and we this is a really important thing for a newly Orthodox person to understand, and maybe even someone that's come in but hasn't realized that that there's this hierarchy of knowledge, and it requires a humility and a willingness to put aside one's own wisdom. Father Seraphim was one with the 19th century prophet Saint Ignatius Briankanov in teaching that only those who feel the kingdom of God in their own hearts will be able to recognize the true nature of Antichrist when he comes. By contrast, Father Seraphim stated that the, quote, super Orthodox, end quote, of today can very easily become the prey of Antichrist. In a few places, he told how this might happen. Vladimir Soloviev, in his short story of Antichrist, ingeniously suggests that Antichrist, in order to attract Orthodox conservatives, will open a museum of all Christian antiquities. Perhaps the very images of Antichrist himself will be in good Byzantine style. This should be a sobering thought for us. The Antichrist must be understood as a spiritual phenomenon. Why will everyone in the world want to bow down to him? Obviously, it is because there is something in him which responds to something in us. That something being a lack of Christ in us. If we will bow down to him, God forbid that we do so, it will be because we will feel an attraction to some kind of external thing, which might even look like Christianity, since Antichrist means the one who is in place of Christ or looks like Christ. In particular, Father Seraphim saw in the unwarranted, quote unquote, Orthodox attack on Blessed Augustine a sign of the externalism that will lead to acceptance of Antichrist. Augustine's overly logical doctrines, of which Father Seraphim himself said he was no great admirer, were only the external intellectual aspect of a man whose heart was clearly Orthodox. As Father Seraphim wrote in a letter, the one main lovable and Orthodox thing about him is his Orthodox feeling, piety, love for Christ, which comes out so strongly in his non-dogmatic works like his confessions. The Russian fathers also love the soliloquies. To destroy Augustine, as today's critics are trying to do, is to help to destroy also this piety and love for Christ. I myself fear the cold hearts of the quote-unquote intellectually correct, much more than any errors you might find in Augustine. I sense in these cold hearts a preparation for the work of Antichrist, whose imitation of Christ must also extend to quote-unquote correct theology. I feel in Augustine the love of Christ. So that's probably worth rereading. I won't do it, but it again underlies the importance of getting beyond the words, getting beyond the theology, in understanding the inner heart of Orthodox spiritual and liturgical life. And that takes time, in my experience. It takes a lot of time, and it also takes a lot of suffering, and suffering according to God. And one doesn't need to go looking for things, crosses to bear. God will allow the crosses that we need to come to us. But in our embrace of those crosses, we will learn about the faith, about what Orthodoxy is. Until that time, we have ideas, and that's fine. That's where you start out. It's good to read books. It's good to have theological conversations, unless they turn into arguments that arouse the passions and that cause us to act and speak in prideful, in judgmental ways. And I think this is a great temptation that we need to be really careful of. And I tend to try to flee away from that temptation. And it's so easy to get caught up in these things, especially if one's on social media. But all one has to do is to discern what effect it's having on oneself, on one's heart, on one's peace, and to see that it's not of God. So we don't have to feel like the church is going to fall or stand based on our so-called correct understanding of things. God wants soft hearts, compassionate hearts, hearts that are loving and humble and gentle. And St. Paul talks about the fruits of the Spirit, and it's worth looking at that passage, frequently and asking ourselves, is this what's being cultivated in my life? Or is judgmentalism being cultivated? Is pride being cultivated? I think this is a great temptation. And Father Seraphim obviously did too. Let's see where we're at in the chapter. Oh, we might actually be able to finish it. Yeah, why don't we try to finish it? And it's so great. I'm so glad to be rereading the life of Father Seraphim. He's such an inspiring figure. I really, there's so much in his biography that I think every convert should read. You know, there's so much. Abbot Damascene has done such a wonderful job and such a gift. I know that it's hard to find right now. I don't know if there's an ebook version, but I've been told that they're working on a new printing. So I do recommend it. Over and over again, Father Seraphim counseled his fellow Orthodox Christians to have love and compassion for the suffering. There are the daily opportunities for expressing Christian love, he said, giving alms, visiting the sick, helping those in need. So, especially as we go through Lent, and we're called to, increased fasting and prayer as well as almsgiving. This is something that this is how practically we can enter into this, and even if initially it's difficult, the process is something that eventually works on the heart. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit distracted because I've got it playing in the other room, and so I'm hearing myself. If I seem a little bit distracted, that's why. Frequently, Father Seraphim commented on the danger of making Orthodoxy into a style, while at the same time overlooking one's most basic duties as a Christian. In one talk, he said, "Do we perhaps boast that we keep the fasts in the church calendar, have quote unquote good icons in quote unquote congregational singing, that we give to the poor and perhaps tithe to the church? Do we delight in exalted patristic teachings and theological discussions without having in our hearts the simplicity of Christ and true compassion for the suffering? If so, then ours is a, quote, spirituality with comfort, unquote. And we will not have the spiritual fruits that will be exhibited by those without all these comforts, who deeply suffer and struggle for Christ." This is a difficult, kind of a difficult thing to navigate, especially as one's beginning. That's why I mentioned, in almsgiving, initially it can seem difficult or it can seem external, and but the Father's counsel over and over that one learns to love by loving, and one learns to be compassionate by being compassionate, and putting oneself in places and giving oneself opportunities for the heart to be softened is how we go about having our heart softened, and God will respond to the efforts that we make. He will provide us with grace and deeper understanding when he sees our efforts to keep the commandments. So at the start, it can seem mechanistic, but this kind of is related to being faithful to the tradition and just giving ourselves over to what the church teaches, and doing the things that the church does and that Christians have done. Like I said earlier, it's not complicated. The commandments of Christ are clear, and we tend to complicate them. And certainly, in Orthodoxy, there's a wealth that we've been given, but initially, that can be hard to navigate because it can kind of be overwhelming, and we can focus on these externals to the detriment of the gospel commandments. And without the gospel, without following the gospel commandments, all these other things are just useless, maybe at best, and can actually become obstacles if we aren't careful. In 1979, when speaking about Archbishop Andrew, formerly Father Adrian of New Divievo, who had reposed the year before, Father Seraphim said, quote, he hated the hothouse Christianity of those who, quote, enjoy being Orthodox, but don't live a life of struggling and deepening their Christianity. We converts can easily fall for this hothouse orthodoxy too. We can live close to a church, have English services, a good priest, go frequently to church and receive the sacraments, be in the quote unquote correct jurisdiction, and still be cold, unfeeling, arrogant, and proud, as St. Tikhon of Zadansk has said, end quote. So that again, I think merits rereading. We can have all these things that externally seem to be perfect or right, but we need to be honest with ourselves if we are just going through the motions and are being actually inside being judgmental, pharisaical, and prideful about these things. If we see pride in ourselves, if we see judgment of others in ourselves, these should be red flags. These should be red flags. There's no place for that. There's not going to be spiritual growth until we deal with those things, and we need to fight against the temptation to judgment and to pride about being super correct, about being right. That is a greater danger than the temptations on the other side. A hard heart is just about the worst thing that one can have. In the same talk, Father Seraphim spoke on how one can try to be, quote unquote, spiritual while neglecting basic Christian love. Quote, our spiritual life is not something bookish or that follows formulas. Everything we learn has to become part of our life and something natural to us. We can be reading about hesychasm and the Jesus prayer, for example, and begin to say it ourselves, and still be blind to our own passions and unresponsive to a person in need right in front of us, not seeing that this is a test of our Christianity that comes at a more basic level than saying the Jesus prayer. Wherever you are in your spiritual life, Father Seraphim counseled, you are to begin right there to take part in the life of the church, to offer struggles to God, to love each other, to become aware of the people around you, to see that you are responsible for them, for being at least kind and cheerful, trying to do good deeds. You are to be aware of the unhappiness of others, to cheer them up and help them out. All of these things promote the life of grace in the church. We've gone through and are going through a difficult time in the church because of COVID. And I don't want to get into these issues, but I would encourage you to reread this chapter with the current temptations in mind. I think Father Seraphim, I'm not going to presume to speak for Father Seraphim, but at very least, he provides questions that we should be asking ourselves about our approach to the situation and our approach to our priests and our hierarchs and to our neighbor, and ask, be critical of ourselves, try to discern what our motivations are and what kind of effect our actions have on our brothers. And I think it's been a time of great temptation, and hopefully everyone will bear their cross and come out the other end stronger and more humble and more loving. If so, then glory to God. So hopefully it will provide a catalyst for good things, for virtue. Let's see. Such was Father Seraphim's counsel on showing Christian love through outward actions. Counsel which, as we have seen, he first put into practice himself. But he also spoke about giving love to others in a way that was not shown outwardly, that is, through praying for them. Here again, his counsel is born out of his own experience, as he prayed daily for people in the silence of his heart and the solitude of his cell. He prayed not only for those close to him, but also for people throughout the world whom he knew about, especially those he knew were suffering. In 1981, when an Orthodox priest asked Father Seraphim about the role of prayer in the life of a monk, Father Seraphim emphasized the monk's duty to pray for others and ultimately for the whole world. A monk, he said, is free to pray more than the ordinary layman is able to, because the whole monastic life is centered around the church's services, which we have in the morning, in the evening, and at various other times of the day. Therefore, he prays for the cycle of the church's services, and a special part of his prayer is the prayer, both in church and in his own cell, for others. In the world, people are not usually so free to devote time to praying for others, but the monastic has the opportunity to devote himself to this kind of prayer. In his prayer in the desert, away from the ways of the world, he can call to mind those who are in various conditions of suffering, sorrows, or struggles. Often those people in the world have no one to have sympathy on them in their struggles. The monastic is one who can do this. We receive mail from people all over the world telling about their needs and their struggles, and therefore we take this obligation upon ourselves of praying for them, asking God's mercy upon all those who are in conditions of need throughout the world. In the Orthodox understanding of monastic life, a monk on leaving the world does not at all cease having love and concern for the world, nor does he cease to labor for it. His love and his labor for the world are expressed in his prayer for it. He actually helps to sustain the world through his prayers. Father Seraphim took seriously his monastic duty of praying for the world. With this in mind, he made it a point to keep abreast with the plight of suffering people all over the world, especially those who live under communist and totalitarian Muslim regimes. In his talk at the 1979 St. Herman pilgrimage, it was titled Orthodox Christians Facing the 1980s, he tried to make people aware of the tremendous suffering that was occurring in the world around them, from the drowning of thousands of Southeast Asian boat people to the extermination of 1/4 of the population of Cambodia under the communist dictator Pol Pot. During the same lecture, he read a moving letter which he had received from an Orthodox Christian in Degea, Uganda, where the people had just come out from under the regime of the Muslim dictator Idi Amin. As the letter made clear, Idi Amin's regime had been ruthlessly persecuting Christians, killing priests and believers, closing or bombing their churches, and changing Sunday services to Friday, the Muslim holy day. Father Seraphim did not neglect to draw a comparison between this Muslim dictatorship and communist totalitarianism. It's frightful, he remarked. There are pictures of Idi Amin's torture chambers, just like under communism. But Idi Amin did this in his own name, in order to make Islam the religion of Uganda. Even though monastics have a greater responsibility to pray for the world because of their greater opportunity, Father Seraphim made clear that this duty is common to all Christians. In his talks, he counseled monastics and lay people alike to go throughout the world in their minds, praying for those who are struggling and suffering. He especially asked them to pray for Christians who are being persecuted for their faith. There can be no doubt that Father Seraphim's preaching of orthodoxy of the heart came out of a deepening of his prayer life and out of a corresponding deepening of what he called, quote, the essential experience of pain of heart, end quote. Elder Paisius, now Saint Paisius, a revered spiritual father who reposed recently on Mount Athos, has well described the experience of prayer with pain for other people, which Father Seraphim entered into which he called others. Prayer which is not from the heart, said Elder Paisius, but is made only by the mind, doesn't go any further. To pray with the heart, we must hurt. Just as when we hit our hand or some other part of our body, our nous, spirit, is gathered to the point we are hurting. So also for the nous to gather in the heart must hurt. We should make the other's pain our own. We must love the other. We must hurt for him so that we can pray for him. We must come out little by little from our own self and begin to love, to hurt for other people as well, for our family first, and then for the large family of Adam, of God. That was St. Paisius. Father Seraphim's love for others, expressed in his outward deeds and in his inward prayer, was both the means and the evidence of his going deeper into the Orthodox Christian faith. As our Lord Jesus Christ has said, "By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Father Seraphim had truly been granted the prayer he had brought before the Mother of God in 1961, when he had asked her to let him enter the, quote, heart of hearts of the saving faith of Christ. At the heart of true Christianity, he had found that on which hang all the law and the prophets, that is love for God and love for one's neighbor. It was the first and second commandment of the incarnate God, of him who made of love a law. So, thanks be to God. So I'm going to put that link into the description below the video for those who are watching this later and don't have the chat box, I guess. But don't really have too much more to add. I mean, I probably made all the commentary and probably more than was needed. But if you haven't read it, I would encourage you to read the chapter and the biography if you can get your hands on it. Very, very helpful. Father Seraphim's life is very inspiring for converts from anywhere, but especially for American converts. He is greatly beloved throughout the Orthodox world. There are icons that have been painted of him prematurely, but that just kind of shows the love and veneration that people have for him. I think I've seen icons on Mount Athos of him. Certainly in Russia, he was very beloved as he did what he could to make Orthodox texts available under communism. And then he was a great translator as well of the spiritual riches of the Russian tradition into English. And if you aren't familiar with St. Herman Monastery in Platina, California, it's a wonderful monastery now under the Serbians. But they lead a very, very strict life. Father Seraphim was a great lover of the ascetic life, and that tradition has been preserved there. But it's a wonderful place with wonderful monks, and they do a really, really wonderful work, publishing work. So I encourage you to support them, and if you get the opportunity to go and visit them. So it's been very quiet, very one way this evening. Maybe that's a good sign that everyone's Lent is going well, and we are turned more inwards than outwards. So I think I'm probably really tempted just to kind of continue to work through Father Seraphim's biography. If you haven't seen it, it's huge, so it could last us for a couple years, probably easily. But it's definitely worth it. It's that good. So we'll see. I will find another chapter to go through, probably for next month. But I think that's probably it, unless anyone wants to ask or comment. So I pray this is finding everyone well and strong and inspired as we continue to traverse the sea of Great Lent. So, all right, I am going to call it a night then. Good strength. Please pray for me as I pray for you. And we will do this again next month at the end of April. I'm not sure how that's going to work. I think probably the last Monday is going to be great, Holy Monday. Probably we'll do it then. It'll be that or Bright Monday. So we'll see. But I will let my patrons know. And for those of you who are not patrons, just please subscribe and hit the bell to get notified when new videos become available and when I go live next. So good strength, and see you in about a month. Take care.